I thought storms were just wind and water until I stood on the deck of our research vessel and saw lightning strike the sea without sound, the ocean boiling as if something beneath it had stirred. That's when they handed me the list of 11 strange rules. Rules every storm researcher on the North Atlantic must follow if they want to come back alive. I didn't believe them at first, not until I broke one and realized the thunder wasn't coming from the sky. I still remember the vibration under my feet, the way it spread through the ship like a heartbeat. I've followed the rules ever since, though sometimes I wonder if they're enough. I had only been on the vessel for 2 nights when the captain finally gave me the list, and the first thing my eyes landed on was Rule 1. Never record the first thunder. It sounded absurd in writing, even childish, like a fisherman's superstition passed down from dock to dock. I almost laughed, but the serious look on his weather-beaten face killed any chance of humor. He didn't explain why, not fully, but he told me in a low voice that breaking it was how you invited attention. I didn't understand what he meant until the first storm rolled over us, and I saw for myself why no one dared to keep that sound. The North Atlantic at night has a kind of silence that is more suffocating than peace. It isn't the absence of noise, but the presence of something bigger than you can ever hope to grasp. The ship groaned as the waves slapped its sides, and lightning lit the horizon in bursts that felt almost staged, like curtains rising and falling. I sat in the monitoring bay, staring at the equipment, waiting for something measurable, something scientific, to prove this wasn't just nerves. Then it came, a low vibration that rattled through my bones before I even heard it. The first thunder. My instinct was to reach for the record button, but my hand froze halfway. Allan, one of the new technicians, noticed my hesitation and smirked. "You're not actually buying into that rule nonsense, are you?" he whispered, leaning in so the others couldn't hear. His hand hovered near the controls, eager, reckless, and curious in the worst possible way. I didn't answer, but my eyes locked on the captain, who had appeared silently in the doorway, his gaze fixed on us. He didn't need to speak. The rule was already there in my head, warning me not to press anything. But Allan, fueled by arrogance, tapped the button anyway, and in that moment, the storm seemed to notice. The speakers hissed with static, so loud it made my teeth ache, and every monitor on the wall erupted with jagged lines of impossible frequency. The sound wasn't just thunder anymore. It was layered alive, twisting into something that tried to form syllables. The lights on the deck flickered, and then dimmed to the glow of dying embers. I could feel the air shift, heavy with the weight of something unseen. Allan's smirk faltered as the recording played back, and what poured from the speakers wasn't weather. It was a voice, deep and broken, calling from beneath the sea. I wanted to believe it was interference, some natural phenomenon we didn't understand yet, but the way the captain lunged forward told me otherwise. He slammed the console shut and yanked the wires out, cursing under his breath as the static died. Allan tried to argue, insisting we had caught something historic, but the captain's face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. "Do you want it to find us?" he snapped, his voice low but sharp enough to silence the room. Allan didn't respond, and no one else dared to. The rule wasn't just a superstition, it was protection. We drifted for hours with no power, except emergency lights. Every shadow on deck stretched into something monstrous. I couldn't shake the feeling that the thunder was following us, echoing through the water instead of the sky. Each time the hull shuddered, I swore I felt something brush against it, slow and deliberate, like the ocean itself was testing our defenses. The crew moved cautiously, speaking in whispers, their eyes darting to the dark waves as if expecting hands to rise from them. I sat with my back against the steel wall, staring at the blank console, and wondered what would have happened if the captain hadn't stopped that recording sooner. Allan sat opposite me, fidgeting with his gloves, his face pale but still defiant. "It was just thunder," he muttered, as though trying to convince himself. No one corrected him, but the silence that followed was louder than any storm. I couldn't shake the sound of that voice from my head. It hadn't been random. and it hadn't been natural. It had been a call, and Allan had answered it. That thought wrapped itself around my spine and squeezed until I couldn't sit still. I stood, went outside for air, and froze when I saw the water. The sea should have been wild, thrashing in the storm's grip, but instead it was eerily calm around us, as though something beneath had flattened the waves. Lightning flashed across the horizon, but no sound followed, no second thunder to explain what we'd heard. I gripped the rail, the cold biting into my palms, and peered down into the dark. For the briefest second, I thought I saw something moving far below, a shadow too large to belong to any whale, rising and falling with unnatural grace. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled back, colliding with Allan, who had followed me out. He laughed, though it was weak, unconvincing. "You're spooked," he said. I wanted to argue, but then the ship shifted, not from wind or wave, but from something pushing against it from underneath. We both clutched the railing as the vessel tilted slightly, groaning under the strain. The captain's voice rang out from the deck, sharp and commanding, telling everyone to stay inside. Allan ignored him, leaning over the edge as if daring the ocean to reveal its secrets. I grabbed his sleeve, but he shook me off, muttering that he wanted proof, real proof, to silence the fear. Then it came again, that low, deliberate rumble that wasn't thunder at all. It vibrated through the metal, through my bones, and the water rippled outward in perfect circles, as if something massive had exhaled beneath us. Allan's eyes widened, and for the first time that night, I saw genuine fear in him. The sound didn't fade like thunder should. It lingered, pulsing, growing clearer, until I swore I could almost make out words buried inside it. My skin prickled, and a sick realization washed over me. Whatever made that sound wasn't above us. It was beneath. The captain stormed onto the deck, grabbing Allan by the collar and dragging him back inside. His voice was low but urgent, telling us we had already invited enough attention, and if we wanted to live, we had to act as though we had heard nothing. I didn't know what that meant, but the weight in his tone left no room for doubt. We sealed the bay, powered down the remaining equipment, and sat in the red glow of emergency lights. No one spoke, no one moved. The only sound was that endless, patient rumble below us, as though the sea itself was breathing in rhythm with our fear. Hours passed, and though the storm above drifted farther into the horizon, none of us dared to rest. Every vibration of the hull felt like a reminder that we had already been noticed. I couldn't shake the image of that shadow in the water, the thought that it was circling us even now, waiting for another mistake. I tried to tell myself we were safe as long as we didn't break any more rules, but a part of me already knew the truth. Allan had recorded the first thunder, and now something knew we were here. When I finally closed my eyes, exhausted, I dreamt of voices whispering in the static, whispering in patterns that sounded like my name. And when I woke, the ship was still trembling, faintly, as though something below us hadn't yet decided whether to let go. The next morning, the ocean looked deceptively calm, but the crew carried themselves with a stiffness that betrayed how little rest they had gotten. I noticed the captain, watching the horizon, his jaw tight, his hands steady, even when the waves rocked us side to side. That was when he pulled me aside and pointed to the second line on the list. Rule 2, never step outside alone after midnight. He didn't elaborate, only told me in a tone that allowed no argument that the night hours belonged to something else. I wanted to ask what he meant, but the memory of last night's thunder rumble still lingered in my bones, and I knew better than to laugh at the warning. Throughout the day, I kept busy cataloging wind patterns and wave charts, trying to lose myself in numbers and graphs instead of the gnawing anxiety in my stomach. Allan, however, wasn't so quick to let go of his arrogance. He kept whispering to anyone who would listen that the captain was losing his grip, that storms were storms and nothing more. But no one paid him attention anymore, not after the static and that unearthly vibration that none of us could explain. I avoided him, focusing on my duties, though I couldn't stop glancing at the portholes, half expecting to see something pale and massive sliding just beneath the waves. Night fell faster than I anticipated, the kind of thick darkness that feels heavier at sea than on land. The vessel creaked with the shifting currents, and emergency lights cast everything in an eerie red glow. We gathered in the mess hall for dinner, most of us too tired to speak. The captain made a quiet announcement, reminding everyone of the list, his eyes pausing longer than usual as he repeated the second rule. I noticed how some of the older crew shifted uncomfortably, their hands tightening around utensils. That silence told me everything. I wasn't the only one who felt the weight of what lingered outside. After midnight, I woke to use the restroom and found Allan pacing by the door, muttering to himself. He froze when he saw me, his expression caught between defiance and desperation. "They're keeping us prisoners," he hissed, like children afraid of the dark. He said he was going topside to breathe, that he couldn't stand the recycled air and the endless red light anymore. I reminded him, firmly, of the captain's warning and the rule etched on that sheet, but Allan only smirked, the same smirk he'd worn before pressing record. His hand was already on the latch when I grabbed his arm, trying to stop him. He pulled free and slipped into the night before I could react. For a moment, I considered following him, but the captain's words anchored me, never alone after midnight. The rule wasn't about fear, it was about survival. I pressed my ear against the steel hatch, straining to hear anything beyond the dull crash of waves. At first, there was nothing, and I thought maybe Allan would come back, smug and unharmed. But then I heard it, slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the deck above, heavier than his, dragging slightly as though something larger and less human moved with him. My throat tightened, and I backed away from the door, heart pounding so hard it felt like it would echo. Minutes passed like hours, each second filled with the muted thud of those footsteps. I gripped the railing of the hallway, forcing myself not to breathe too loudly, not to draw attention. Then came a muffled voice, Allan's pleading, trembling in a way I had never heard before. He wasn't mocking anymore. The words were too faint to catch, but the tone carried terror, begging rather than defiance. I wanted to help him, but I couldn't make myself move closer. Something deep inside whispered that if I opened that door, whatever was with him would see me too. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched long enough to make me believe it was over, that maybe Allan had gone to the bow or slipped out of hearing range. Then suddenly, the sound returned, closer this time, brushing along the outer wall just feet from where I stood. The steel vibrated under the pressure of a weight pressing against it, testing, probing, like a hand searching for weakness. I stumbled back, biting down on my tongue to keep from crying out. When the pressure finally lifted, I dared to look out the nearest porthole, my breath fogging the glass. The ocean beyond was black, endless, yet for a fleeting moment, I saw something pale moving just beneath the surface. It wasn't a fish, and it wasn't a wave. It was the curve of something vast, with ridges that caught the moonlight before sinking back into the depths. Then further along the deck, I caught sight of Allan standing stiffly near the railing, his face tilted toward the sea. He wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, just staring into the water as though in a trance. I raised a hand to the glass, wanting to shout, but the words died in my throat. Before I could gather the courage, a flash of lightning illuminated the deck, and I saw it clearly, a tall shadowed figure standing behind him. It wasn't shaped like a man, though it tried to be, its limbs too long, its posture wrong, its head bent at an unnatural angle as it leaned close to Allan's ear. He didn't resist, he didn't even flinch. The figure placed one elongated hand on his shoulder, and together they turned toward the sea. The light faded, and with it, both of them vanished into the dark. I staggered back, my chest heaving as the realization sank in. Allan hadn't broken a superstition. He had broken a rule designed to protect us from something real, something waiting for us to be foolish enough to step outside alone. I stayed frozen until dawn, crept across the horizon, too afraid to tell anyone what I had seen. When the captain did his morning count and found Allan missing, He didn't ask questions. He only looked at me, eyes tired and knowing, and quietly reminded the crew that there were reasons for every warning on that list. The day passed in uneasy silence, no one mentioning Allan's name, no one daring to ask what had happened. But that night, as I lay awake listening to the waves, I swore I heard a faint tapping against the hull from outside, almost rhythmic, almost like a hand knocking to be let back in. The next morning, the tapping against the hull had stopped, but the unease it left behind clung to me like salt in the air. Nobody spoke about Allan, though the empty chair in the mess hall was impossible to ignore. The captain didn't mourn out loud, and neither did the others. They simply carried on, their faces set in stone. Later that evening, when he pulled me aside again, he pointed at the next line on the crumpled sheet, Rule 3, never shine a light directly into the waves. His voice was low, his tone almost pleading this time, and I understood without asking that Allan's disappearance was a lesson no one wanted repeated. The rule seemed strange to me, stranger even than the first two. Lights were a necessity on the open sea, weren't they? Without them, we were blind to the vast expanse around us, unable to see hazards or measure distance. But as night fell again, the captain ordered every deck light angled upward or inward, never outward toward the water. The ship became a shadow drifting through blackness, our visibility cut down to a faint glow on the deck. My instincts screamed against it, but I obeyed, reminding myself that every warning so far had proven justified. Still, curiosity gnawed at me like hunger. What could possibly happen if someone broke this rule? That answer came sooner than I expected. Around midnight, a heavy fog rolled in, curling around the ship like smoke, blotting out the stars. I stood on watch duty, fighting off exhaustion as the air grew damp and cold. The fog made the silence worse, pressing in so thick I could barely see 5 feet ahead. That was when I noticed a faint shimmer near the starboard side, like moonlight reflecting off water. My first instinct was to grab the flashlight at my hip, to cut through the haze, but the rule screamed in my head, halting me mid-motion. I hesitated, torn between duty and fear, when movement caught my eye. It was Allan. At least, it looked like Allan. His outline appeared faintly through the fog, standing on the waves themselves, as though the ocean had hardened beneath him. His face was pale, his clothes sodden, but he was upright, staring at the ship with hollow eyes. My chest tightened, and without thinking, my hand gripped the flashlight again. He raised an arm, beckoning, his lips moving in a silent plea I couldn't hear. Every part of me wanted to shine the light, to confirm what I was seeing, to prove he was really there. But something deeper, instinctual, whispered that if I did, I'd regret it. Behind me, one of the newer crew members, a man named Reyes, stumbled out onto the deck. He hadn't been there during Allan's disappearance, and he wasn't burdened by the same fear we carried. He cursed under his breath about the fog, and flicked on his beam, aiming it straight across the waves. My stomach dropped as the light cut through the mist, landing directly where I'd seen Allan. Only, it wasn't Allan anymore. The figure shifted in the glow, its proportions warping, elongating, its eyes reflecting white like an animal's caught at night. Its head snapped toward us with unnatural speed, and the water beneath it began to writhe. Reyes froze, his face draining of color, but it was too late. The beam seemed to tether the thing to us, dragging its attention fully onto the ship. The fog thickened instantly, and the waves surged higher, slamming against the hull with a force that rattled every bolt. From below came that same low vibration I had heard when Allan recorded the thunder, a sound that wasn't meant for human ears. Reyes dropped the flashlight, his hands trembling, but the damage had been done. The light flickered once more before dying, leaving us in darkness, and in that blackness, the sound of something climbing echoed from the waterline. We scrambled to the hatch, the captain already shouting for the deck to be cleared. I shoved Reyes inside ahead of me, slamming the door just as a heavy thud reverberated through the steel. The crew stared at one another in silence, listening as wet, dragging motions scraped along the outer walls. No one dared to move. Then came the sound of nails, long, sharp, metallic, raking across the surface as though testing the barrier between us. Harris sat trembling, his face buried in his hands, muttering apologies no one acknowledged. I wanted to scream at him, but fear stole my voice. Hours passed before the noises stopped, each minute stretching into eternity. When dawn broke, the fog lifted, and the sea returned to its deceptive calm, but the side of the hull bore fresh marks, deep grooves carved into steel, as though it were soft wood. The captain made no speech, no lecture. He only looked at Harris with eyes heavy with disappointment and fear, then turned to the rest of us and reminded us that rules were written in blood, not ink. Harris avoided everyone's gaze, his face pale, his movements slow, like a man already carrying a death sentence. That night, when I lay in my bunk, I couldn't close my eyes. The image of Allan's hollow stare haunted me, and I kept replaying the moment Harris's light revealed something that wore his shape, but wasn't him. I wondered if it had been waiting for that chance, if it had been drifting alongside us all along, invisible until the light betrayed us. My thoughts spiraled darker with every creak of the ship, and when I finally did drift into uneasy sleep, I dreamt of pale faces pressed against the porthole glass, waiting for someone foolish enough to shine a light their way. When I woke, Harris was gone. The morning Harris disappeared. The ship was gripped by a silence heavier than the sea fog. No one dared to mention his name, and no one dared to ask where he had gone. The captain gathered us in the mess hall, his expression carved from iron, and reminded us of the next warning etched onto the sheet. Rule 4. Never answer a voice that calls your name from the water. He said it slowly, almost reverently, as if speaking it aloud invited danger. My stomach turned cold. Voices from the water? I thought it was metaphorical, maybe superstition, until I remembered Allan's pale lips moving soundlessly in the fog. The day passed without incident, though every crash of a wave against the hull felt like a whisper trying to crawl inside. By nightfall, exhaustion hit me like lead. But sleep was impossible. The creaks of the ship blended with the memory of Harris's pale face, and I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my pulse drumming in my ears. Around midnight, when the rest of the crew finally dozed, I heard it soft at first, then clearer, my name. Not shouted, not demanded, but coaxed, carried on the wind, like a lover's sigh. My breath caught in my throat. I tried convincing myself it was a dream, but the second time it came, I sat up, heart pounding. I forced myself toward the porthole, against every shred of reason, and froze when I reached it. The voice was clearer now, cutting through the thrum of waves. It was my mother's voice. She had been gone for years, buried under cold soil far from this ocean, but she was here, calling, begging me to answer. Please, just once, it whispered. My hands trembled against the glass as I stared into the black expanse. Nothing waited there but water, yet I could swear a face hovered just beneath the surface, pale and rippling, lips moving with the sound I heard. I nearly answered, the word lodged in my throat, but the captain's earlier warning thundered through me like a hammer. I stumbled back from the window, but curiosity is a cruel master. I needed someone else to hear it, to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. I shook Reyes awake, his eyes groggy and irritated, and begged him to listen. He cursed at me until he too froze, his face draining of color as the sound drifted into the room. Only it wasn't my mother's voice he heard. It was his brother's. I watched the realization tear through him, saw the pain in his eyes as he gripped the edge of his bunk. He whispered, "He drowned when we were kids," and my blood ran cold. The voice called again, louder this time, more insistent. Reyes stumbled toward the porthole as if pulled by invisible threads. I tried to grab him, to remind him of the rule, but he shoved me away with a desperation that wasn't his own. He pressed his face against the glass, whispering words too low for me to catch, answering a ghost that shouldn't exist. For a moment everything went still, the ship quiet, the ocean calm. Then something slammed against the outside of the hull, so hard the metal groaned. Reyes screamed, not in fear but in longing, shouting his brother's name into the dark water. And then in a single motion, he wrenched open the latch and vanished into the night. I lunged, but I was too late. Cold air whipped into the cabin, carrying with it the scent of salt and decay. The others jolted awake, rushing to the noise, but all we found was the open porthole and the echo of that voice, now silent. We searched the decks, we checked the waves with every forbidden impulse to shine a light, but nothing remained of Reyes except the memory of his scream. The captain said nothing when he arrived. He only shut the hatch, crossed Reyes's name off the log, and ordered everyone back inside. It was a ritual now, one we all knew too well. The rest of the night, no one slept. We sat in silence, listening, waiting, each of us wondering whose name might be whispered next. Every splash outside the hull felt deliberate, every groan of the ocean like a taunt. I kept thinking of my mother's voice, how tender and pleading it had sounded, how close I had come to answering. I realized then the true cruelty of the rule. It wasn't about ignoring monsters, it was about ignoring the ones you loved most, twisted into lures by something that wanted you beneath the waves. And the thought that it knew me that intimately made my skin crawl. By dawn, Reyes was gone, as if he had never existed, swallowed by the same ocean that had taken Allan and Reyes. But the whispers lingered in my ears, long after the sun rose, faint and patient, as though they had all the time in the world. I began to wonder if surviving here was truly possible, or if these rules only delayed the inevitable. The water was waiting. It always was. The loss of Reyes hit the crew harder than Allan or Reyes. Maybe it was because we had seen him taken, heard his scream as he vanished into the waves, or maybe because the voice that lured him had been so personal, so intimate. It reminded us all that nothing about this place was random. When the captain gathered us again, he read the next warning with a voice that trembled for the first time. Rule 5, never go below deck alone after midnight. His hand lingered on the paper longer than before, as though he didn't want to let it go. I felt the weight of his stare settle on me, and I knew I wasn't the only one, wondering what exactly waited below. That night, I tried to keep my mind busy with the rhythm of the waves and the faint hum of the engines, but midnight came like it always did, creeping in slow and suffocating. The air felt heavier, as if the ship itself knew what hour it was. Every groan of the steel echoed louder. Every drip of condensation from the pipes sounded deliberate. I stayed in my bunk, fighting sleep, but when the machinery below shifted gears, I felt a compulsion to check it. Logic told me it was the mechanic's job, but something darker whispered that if I didn't, we'd all pay the price. The urge was nearly unbearable, as though the ship itself was pulling at my bones. I wasn't the only one. Beside me, Burke, a deckhand with more muscle than sense, muttered curses about the rattling pipes and stood. He grabbed a wrench and sneered when I reminded him of the rule. "You think I'm scared of shadows and stories?" he said, his voice low but mocking. I watched him walk toward the hatch, shoulders squared, every step a challenge to the unseen. No one stopped him, though the fear in our eyes begged him not to go. The hatch closed behind him, and the silence that followed was worse than any sound. Minutes passed, then the first noise reached us. Footsteps, steady and deliberate, pacing just beneath the floor. Too slow to be Burke's, too heavy to belong to a single man. The sound circled beneath us, dragging, scraping, like something pulling its weight across metal. Then we heard his voice. Burke's. Only it wasn't a shout or a call. It was a whisper, echoing up through the vents, repeating our names one by one. The chill that spread through the room was immediate, freezing marrow and thought alike. "He's dead," someone whispered, but no one dared to move. I couldn't stop myself. I pressed my ear to the floor, praying it was just Burke, playing some cruel trick. Instead I heard breathing, wet, labored, impossibly close, and then it laughed. Not the laugh of any man, but a sound that clattered through the pipes like water rushing over stones. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat, and the others recoiled as if the noise had touched them too. Seconds later, The pacing stopped. The silence that replaced it was absolute, and we all sat frozen, waiting for the next sound, praying it wouldn't come. Hours crawled by before the hatch finally creaked open. We jumped as Burke emerged, his clothes soaked with sweat, his face pale and blank. He said nothing, not a word, and walked straight past us into his bunk. His eyes never blinked, never shifted, and he lay down with the stiffness of a corpse. I wanted to ask him what he had seen, what had touched him, but something in my gut screamed not to. By dawn, his bunk was empty, the sheets cold. We never saw Burke again. The captain didn't bother to gather us this time. He didn't have to. We all understood. Whatever lived below deck after midnight didn't let anyone come back whole. I avoided the lower levels like they were fire, but that night, when the ship's engine stuttered again, I felt the same pull dragging at my mind. Something wanted me down there, wanted all of us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that sooner or later, one of us would break the rule again, not by choice, but because the ship itself would make sure of it. After Burke disappeared, the air on board grew heavier, like the ship itself had swallowed part of our breath. Meals were quieter. Eyes avoided one another, and every creak in the metal carried new dread. It wasn't long before the captain revealed the next warning, his voice low and resigned. Rule 6. Never touch the barnacles that grow on the hull. At first, I almost laughed. Barnacles? The tiny crustaceans clinging harmlessly to ships? It sounded absurd compared to what we'd endured, but absurdity died the moment I saw them. They began appearing just after dawn, first as faint clusters along the starboard side, pale gray patches clinging to the waterline. By noon, they spread across the hull in swarms, dense colonies that hadn't been there the day before. They pulsed faintly in the sunlight, their shells opening and closing with unnatural rhythm, like mouths gasping for air. None of us could explain it. We hadn't anchored, hadn't passed through reefs, and yet the ship looked as though it had been resting in harbor for decades. My skin prickled when I leaned over the rail to stare at them. They didn't look like barnacles at all. The mechanic, Doyle, didn't share my caution. He was a practical man, stubborn to a fault, and muttered about how the buildup could damage the hull if left unchecked. He fetched a scraper from the tool locker, despite the captain's warning. "They're just shells," he said, voice sharp with annoyance. "You can't expect me to sit on my hands while this ship rots beneath us." I tried reminding him of the rule, but he waved me off, his jaw tight. There was no reasoning with him. By mid-afternoon, he was lowered over the side in a harness, scraper in hand. I stood nearby, heart pounding, as Doyle leaned close to the writhing clusters. His scraper clinked against the first patch, and I swear the entire colony shuddered. The shells rippled outward in waves, opening wide like 100 tiny eyes locking onto him. I shouted for him to stop, but he cursed back, yanking one free. A dark fluid oozed from the broken shell, dripping into the water below, and the ocean responded instantly. The waves beneath him stirred violently, frothing as if boiling from within. Doyle froze, his hands trembling, as a tendril of water, no, something inside the water, slid upward, brushing against his leg. He screamed, but the harness held him in place. More of those slick rope-like appendages writhed upward, wrapping around his boots, his calves, pulling him toward the surface of the sea. The barnacles beneath his hands pulsed faster, their shells clicking in unison like teeth chattering in excitement. We pulled at the harness, shouting, but Doyle thrashed wildly, his arms flailing, scraping desperately at the colonies. Every strike only seemed to agitate them more. His skin blistered where the dark fluid touched him, burning through cloth, leaving welts that hissed in the open air. The captain himself rushed forward, knife in hand, slicing the harness rope. Doyle dropped onto the deck in a heap, convulsing, his arms covered in black streaks where the barnacle slime had spread. He gasped for air, his eyes rolling, his voice a rasp. They were moving, he whispered, clawing at his skin, as though trying to tear it off. We tried holding him down, but he thrashed with unnatural strength. Then he went still. For a moment, I thought he'd passed, but his chest still rose and fell. His eyes opened again, only this time, they weren't Doyle's eyes. They were glossy, milky, reflecting the pulsing barnacles outside. We restrained him, tied him to his bunk, but the damage was already done. By nightfall, clicking noises echoed through the corridors, faint but constant, mimicking the sound of the shells. Doyle's lips moved as if whispering, though no words came out. His skin grew pale, brittle, flaking away like layers of shell peeling from a rock. None of us slept, the clicking gnawing at our nerves, until just before dawn, when the noises stopped. We rushed to his bunk, but it was empty. The ropes had been shredded, not cut, and a wet trail led to the deck. On the starboard side, the barnacles had multiplied again, spreading higher, thicker, pulsing as though in triumph. Nestled among them was Doyle's face, half-formed, his features stretched across the shells like a grotesque imprint. His eyes blinked once, slow, deliberate, before the colony sealed shut over him. Some of the crew retched at the sight, others prayed under their breath, but I just stood frozen, unable to look away. He wasn't gone, not entirely. The barnacles had claimed him, absorbed him, and now he was part of the hull itself. The captain ordered us to keep our distance, his tone sharp with fear he no longer bothered to hide. We avoided the rail, avoided even glancing at the colonies if we could help it, but their clicking followed us everywhere, echoing through the pipes and walls as though they were spreading inside the ship. That night, as I lay in my bunk, I heard Doyle's voice whisper my name again, the same way Reyes had before. My throat tightened, and I pressed my hands to my ears, praying it would fade. It didn't. It only grew louder, closer, until I felt warm breath against my neck. When I turned, no one was there. By the time Doyle was taken, none of us could pretend these rules were superstitions anymore. They were survival guides, written in scars and screams, and every loss carved them deeper into our bones. The captain wasted no time delivering the next warning, his voice flat, drained of hope. Rule 7. Never sleep beside an open porthole. I didn't ask for explanation. There was no need. The thought of lying vulnerable while the ocean pressed against thin glass was enough to make my stomach twist. Still, unease turned to dread when I realized half the crew had bunks directly beside those very windows. That night, as the sun sank and shadows swallowed the ship, everyone grew restless. Men moved their mattresses, dragging them to the center of the room or onto the floor, desperate to put distance between themselves and the glass, but not everyone obeyed. Riley, one of the younger deckhands, mocked the rule with a tired grin. "What difference does a few feet make?" he said, his voice trying too hard to sound confident. He lay in his bunk beside the porthole, arms folded, smirk plastered across his face. We begged him to reconsider, but he only laughed and called us cowards. The night stretched on. I stayed awake, too terrified to risk sleep, and soon regretted it. Around 2 in the morning, the sea outside grew unnaturally still. No waves, no wind, only silence so thick it made my ears ache. Then came the faintest sound, like fingertips brushing glass. I held my breath and turned toward Riley's bunk. He was fast asleep, chest rising and falling, his mouth slightly open. The sound came again, louder this time, deliberate, scratching. I could see condensation forming on the porthole beside him, though the rest of the glass remained clear. Shapes began to smear across it, as if something outside was pressing its face against the pane. I forced myself not to move, not to breathe. My eyes watered from the effort, but I couldn't look away. The outline on the glass sharpened, eyes, a nose, lips, Riley's lips. It was his face staring back at him from outside the ship, distorted by the water but unmistakable. Slowly the reflection began to move, even though Riley himself slept motionless. The thing outside blinked, opened its mouth, and whispered something I couldn't hear, its breath fogging the glass. The scratching intensified, faster now, as if begging to be let in. My chest tightened with panic. I wanted to scream, to shake Riley awake, but my body refused to obey. Then his real body moved. Still asleep, Riley's arm reached toward the latch on the porthole, fingers fumbling lazily, as if guided by someone else's hand. My heart nearly stopped. I leapt forward, slapping his arm away, and he jolted awake with a curse. "What the hell, man?" he shouted, eyes bleary, but I pointed at the glass before I could form words. He turned, saw nothing, and sneered. "Paranoid bastard," he muttered, rolling over. But I knew what I had seen, and worse, I knew it wasn't finished. The scratching didn't stop. It grew louder, more frantic, filling the room with the sound of nails dragging against steel. Other portholes began to fog, pale faces pressing against them from the outside, mouths moving in silent unison. Some looked like strangers, others like copies of us. My stomach lurched as I spotted my own face among them, staring directly at me, its lips curled into a mocking smile. The others awoke to the noise, panic spreading like fire. Men shoved their bunks away from the walls, some covering the glass with blankets, others falling to their knees in prayer. But Riley didn't move. He sat upright now, his eyes glazed, staring into the glass with a vacant expression. He whispered something under his breath, words I couldn't make out, and pressed his palm flat against the pane. The figure outside mirrored him perfectly, its hand meeting his on the other side. The glass groaned, cracks spider-webbed across the surface. Before any of us could react, the porthole burst inward with a sound like shattering bone. Seawater exploded into the room, knocking us back, and through the opening crawled a pale arm, slick and skeletal, grabbing Riley by the throat. He screamed, thrashing, but the thing yanked him toward the opening with impossible strength. We rushed to pull him back, our hands grasping at his limbs, but the water surged harder, dragging him halfway out. His face slammed against the jagged glass, blood mingling with salt water, as his screams turned into gurgles. Then with one final jerk, he was gone, swallowed by the dark sea. The water receded just as quickly as it had come, leaving the room drenched, silent and empty, but for the echo of Riley's last cry. We sealed the broken porthole with boards and metal scraps, but the damage was done. That night, none of us dared close our eyes, faces still pressed against the remaining glass, patient, watching. They never left, even when dawn broke. Their hollow stares burned into us like brands. The captain ordered us to move all bunks away from the walls permanently, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. The rule wasn't just about safety, it was about survival against something that wanted us close, vulnerable, reachable. The next night, I tried to sleep in the center of the room, but the whispers returned, brushing against my ears no matter how tightly I covered them. When I finally glanced toward the porthole, I saw my reflection staring back, not moving with me, but grinning, lips parting slowly. That was when I realized the faces weren't trying to get in. They were waiting for us to let them. By the third week, none of us could tell the difference between exhaustion and madness. We hadn't slept properly since Riley was taken. The portholes now permanently boarded up, but still the faces lingered in our minds. Every creak of the ship, every gust of wind through the rusted vents, felt like a whisper meant only for us. That's when the captain gathered us again on the deck and delivered the next warning. His voice cracked as he spoke, eyes fixed on the horizon like he couldn't bear to look at us. Rule 8. Never answer when the sea calls your name. I didn't understand at first. Calls your name? The sea was nothing but roaring waves and shrieking wind. How could it know us? Know who we were? But as the day bled into night, the truth revealed itself in the most cruel, deliberate way imaginable. It began with Turner, one of the engineers. He was working alone below deck when he stopped suddenly, his wrench clattering to the floor. I found him frozen, eyes wide, lips trembling. When I asked what happened, he whispered, "It said my name, plain as you're saying it now." His voice shook. It was my mother's voice, but it came from the water. We tried to laugh it off, claim it was lack of sleep, but none of us could quite meet his eyes. Then it happened again, to another crewman, then another, always different voices, wives, children, dead fathers, echoing from just beyond the hull, clear as day, always followed by the same eerie hush, as though the sea itself was holding its breath, waiting. The first few times the men resisted. They shook, covered their ears, prayed, but temptation grew. Some broke. I was there when it happened to Harrington, the cook. We were unloading supplies when he suddenly stiffened, dropping a crate. His face went pale, eyes filling with tears. He leaned over the railing, listening, his lips parting. Then he whispered, "Emily?" His daughter's name. The rest of us froze. She's calling me," he stammered, stepping closer to the edge. "She's scared. She needs me." We screamed at him to stop, to back away, but the moment he said her name out loud, the sea answered. It was a sound I'll never forget. Not the crash of a wave, or the cry of a gull, but a voice. Emily's voice. Perfect, lilting, begging, "Daddy, please." Harrington's body jerked like a puppet, yanked by invisible strings. His eyes rolled back, and he hurled himself over the rail, before any of us could grab him. The splash was followed by silence. No thrashing, no bubbles, no sign he'd ever hit the water at all, just gone. That night, no one spoke. We sat huddled in the mess hall, the air heavy with fear, until it began again. First faint, then louder. Voices, not outside, but all around us, vibrating through the steel of the ship. They said our names, one by one, patiently, tenderly. Sometimes it was someone we loved, sometimes someone we'd lost. When it came for me, it was my father's voice. He had drowned when I was 12. Hearing him now, soft and familiar, made my skin crawl and my eyes burn. "Come home," he whispered, the words dripping through the walls like seawater. "Come home to me, son." I clenched my fists until my nails broke skin, refusing to answer, but others weren't so strong. One by one, men disappeared. They didn't all leap from the deck. Some simply walked into dark corners of the ship, chasing the sound, never to be seen again. One of the medics was dragged halfway down a hallway before the rest of us could reach him, his fingers clawing the steel floor, screaming that his brother needed him. He was ripped away into the shadows, his cries cut short as if the sea had swallowed him whole through the ship's very bones. By the fourth night, only a handful of us remained. We barricaded ourselves in a single cabin, stuffing cloth into our ears, humming, praying, anything to drown out the voices, but cloth only muffled, and humming only created space for them to slip through. I learned quickly that the sea didn't just speak, it listened. It tailored its words to our weaknesses, our grief, our deepest wants. When I closed my eyes, my father's voice became my mother's, then my childhood friends, then Doyle's, begging me not to leave him behind. Each shift was like a knife, turning in my chest. The captain, though, never faltered. He sat rigid, back against the door, eyes hollow. "That's how they get you," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "They wait, they learn. The moment you answer, they own you." He pressed a pistol against his temple once, whispering a prayer, but lowered it before pulling the trigger. His hands shook like leaves, yet his will held firm. I couldn't help wondering if that strength would last, when the voice that finally called for him was the one he couldn't ignore. By the sixth day, the voices changed again. They no longer begged, they commanded. "Open the door, step outside, look at us." The tone was colder now, like the sea had grown bored of pretending to care. And then came the sound of fists, pounding against the walls from the outside, each strike echoing through the steel, like cannon fire. The ship rocked under phantom waves, though the ocean outside was calm as glass. When the captain tried to rally us, he shouted too loud, his own name slipped out by accident. The voices seized it instantly, repeating it in chorus, over and over, dozens of versions of the same word, each dripping with hunger. That was when I realized the rule wasn't about strength. It wasn't about ignoring them. It was about silence. Because the sea could imitate, could repeat, could twist, but it couldn't invent, unless we gave it the weapon of our own names. Every time one of us slipped, the sea learned a little more. Every time someone answered, it grew stronger. And if it learned us all, I feared the ship itself wouldn't be enough to hold it back. That night, as I lay awake with my ears covered, I felt a breath against my neck. No sound, just a warm exhale, as if someone was inches from me. My heart pounded, but I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't answer. Then a whisper, directly into my ear, so quiet I almost thought I imagined it. "You're the last one I need." The storm had passed, but the air carried a strange weight, like the sea itself was holding something back. Salt clung to my lips as I stood on deck with the captain, staring at the horizon where darkness pressed harder than the night sky should allow. That was when he muttered the next warning, almost like he hated saying it out loud, yet knew silence would damn us all. His voice cracked as he reminded me, "Rule 9, keep the lanterns burning, no matter the cost." The words sank deep, heavier than the ocean below, because I already knew what it meant to be without light out here. Lanterns had been scattered across the ship long before we ever arrived. Massive, iron-framed things, their glass warped by years of storms. They weren't just practical tools. They were symbols, talismans, the only barrier between us and the abyss that waited just beyond sight. During the day they seemed useless, hanging like relics from another age. But when night swallowed us, they became the only warmth left. Their glow didn't just push back the dark, it pulsed against it, like two living forces locked in constant battle. And each night, I swore I could see shapes retreating just beyond their reach. We rotated shifts to keep them fueled. The oil ran low, yet the captain never wavered. "Burn what you must," he ordered. "Food, wood, your own clothes if it comes to it. The flame must not die." His words seemed dramatic then, but that changed the first time one of the lanterns flickered out. It was Turner's post, near the stern. The flame guttered in the wind, sputtering like a dying breath. By the time we rushed to relight it, Turner was gone. No sound, no scream, just gone, as though the dark had peeled him out of existence. All that remained was the faint echo of his wrench clattering against the deck. That was when we began to fear the shadows. They didn't move like shadows should. They stretched against the light, curving unnaturally, reaching. When one lantern dimmed, the shadows didn't wait. They surged, thick and hungry, as if drawn to weakness. I learned quickly that the lanterns didn't just give us vision. They held the dark at bay, and the dark wasn't empty. It was alive. Keeping the lanterns burning, though, came with its own torment. Oil dwindled after days of storms. We rationed carefully, but it was never enough. Soon we tore apart chairs, splintered doors, anything wooden that could catch flame. When even that ran short, the choices grew harder. We burned rope, crates, paper logs soaked in fish oil. The smell of charred salt and smoke filled every corner of the ship, clinging to our lungs, but the lanterns stayed alive. The captain reminded us again, almost like a mantra, no matter the cost, and each time he said it, I felt the weight of what he left unspoken, what the final cost might be. On the fourth night, I was on watch near the bow when I noticed one of the lanterns trembling. Its glow thinned, and with it came a sound I'll never forget, a scratching, like claws dragging across steel. The shadows beyond the railing swirled, no longer flat, but rising, like figures pressing against glass. I ran for fuel, nearly tripping over my own boots, and slammed a jug of oil into the lantern. The light roared back, and the shadows shrieked, not with sound, but with sudden retreat, vanishing into the blackness, as if light itself had seared them. My hands shook long after, but I understood the rule more than ever. The lanterns weren't optional, they were shields. By the seventh night, Desperation twisted us. Men whispered about conserving oil, about letting one lantern die to save another. The captain silenced them with a single look, his eyes hollow yet burning with rage. "You let one die," he said, "and it'll come for you first. It doesn't matter which one. It knows weakness. It smells it." His conviction should have steadied us, but instead it made the fear worse. Because if the lanterns were the only barrier, then every second we lived was nothing more than borrowed time. I'll never forget the night. Harrigan snapped. He was shivering, exhausted, muttering about his family, when he staggered toward one of the lanterns with a bucket of water. "We can't do this forever," he cried, sloshing it dangerously close to the flame. "Let it go out. Maybe it's not as bad as he says." The others shouted, wrestled him back, but for a heartbeat the lantern dimmed from the splash. In that sliver of weakness, something pressed against the edge of the light. A hand, if you could call it that, long fingers of pure shadow curling over the railing. It didn't look human. It looked like the night itself was reaching inside. Harrigan saw it, screamed, and begged us to kill him before it dragged him away. We didn't have to. The moment the lantern was steady again, the hand withdrew, and Harrigan collapsed, lifeless, as if his heart had simply stopped. After that, no one questioned the rule. We fed the flames with anything we had left. I burned my own jacket, watching the leather curl and blacken, my teeth grinding as smoke stung my eyes. Others sacrificed journals, keepsakes, pieces of their lives they'd once thought too precious to lose. The dark wanted us to choose between memory and survival, and we chose survival every time. But a part of me knew the cost wasn't just material. It was our humanity, piece by piece, burning away. By the 10th night, something shifted. The shadows stopped retreating entirely. They lingered at the edge of the light, closer each hour, as if learning patience. Their forms grew sharper, less abstract, torsos, heads, jaws that opened wide enough to swallow a man whole. They watched us, waiting for even a flicker of weakness, and with every passing moment, the lanterns burned lower, our fuel nearly gone. I started to wonder what would happen when nothing was left to burn. Would they consume us whole, or was there something worse waiting? The captain hasn't told us yet, but I've seen the way he stares at us when the flames dip low. His gaze lingers on our arms, our hair, anything that might catch fire. No matter the cost, he mutters to himself, and I can't tell if he means the ship, our souls, or our bodies. The thought terrifies me more than the shadows outside, because maybe the rule was never about wood or oil. Maybe it was about sacrifice, and maybe when the lanterns burn their last, the only thing left to keep them alive will be us. The sea was eerily calm after the lantern nights, but none of us trusted the quiet. It wasn't peace. It was waiting. Even the captain moved with a tension that spoke of another storm yet to come, though the sky above was clear. We'd burned nearly everything to keep the light alive, but it had bought us only time, not safety. That's when the captain gave us the next warning, his voice low, as if speaking it too loudly might invite the very thing it named. Rule 10. If you hear the bells beneath the waves, do not search for the source. At first I thought it was absurd. Bells, out here in the endless ocean? But the others didn't laugh. Their eyes darted away, their silence louder than fear. Doyle muttered something about shipwrecks, old churches swallowed by the sea, places where the drowned never stopped ringing for salvation. I wanted to dismiss it as superstition, yet deep down, I remembered stories from my father, whispered warnings about ghostly chimes that lured sailors to their graves. Now standing on that creaking deck, I realized those stories might not have been stories at all. The first time I heard them was just past midnight. I was on watch, lantern flickering at my side, when a low, mournful chime floated through the water. It was distant, almost soothing, like the call of a church tower on a foggy morning. For a moment, it felt out of place but harmless. Then came the second chime, clearer, closer, vibrating through the steel under my boots. My chest tightened. I leaned over the rail, peering into the depths, and the sound grew louder, echoing directly in my bones. Doyle's words whispered back to me, "If you hear them, don't look." But instinct is a dangerous thing. I wanted to see, to understand, to prove it was just my imagination. My grip tightened on the rail as I leaned farther. That's when the captain's hand clamped my shoulder with a force that nearly broke me. "Don't," he growled, dragging me back. "They want your eyes. Once you see them, you're theirs." His words shook me harder than the bells, because he wasn't warning me like a captain. He was pleading like a man who'd already seen what happens when someone looks. The bells returned each night after that, sometimes faint, sometimes deafening, as though the ocean itself was alive with their ringing. And each night, I saw the toll it took on the crew. Men pressed rags against their ears, whispered prayers, anything to drown out the sound. But the bells weren't just noise. They were promises. When Harrigan heard them, he swore he could hear his wife's voice layered beneath the tolling, calling him home. Turner claimed it was gold, treasure ringing to be found. The bells spoke to each of us differently, tailoring their call to our wants and our grief. Then one night, Doyle broke. He muttered about needing proof, about not being afraid of a little sound. We begged him to stay back, but he climbed the rail with a lantern, lowering it toward the black surface. The moment the flame touched the water, the bells roared, dozens of them, all at once, clanging so violently, the entire ship seemed to shudder. And then just below the surface, we saw them, shapes half-formed in the glow, drifting like bodies suspended in a tide. Their hands reached upward, chains dragging from their wrists, bells tied to their limbs. Each movement sent another wave of sound into the night. Doyle's lantern slipped, plunging into the water, and before we could grab him, the hands surged. They didn't drag him down, they pulled him apart. The silence afterward was worse than the sound. Only a few drops of blood marked where Doyle had been, spreading into the ocean before vanishing completely. No body, no trace, just the echo of bells, softer now, almost mocking. That was the night we learned. The bells weren't a warning, they were bait. And once you searched for their source, you weren't just lost, you were claimed. From then on, we avoided the railings when the chimes began. We huddled in the center of the deck, lanterns blazing, covering our ears, yet still the bells reached us. Sometimes faint, like they were drifting farther away. Other times deafening, as though they were inside our skulls. Once in the mess hall, I felt the spoon in my hand tremble to the rhythm of the sound. Another night, the steel beams above our bunks groaned with each toll, vibrating until dust rained down on our faces. The sea wasn't content with distance anymore. It was bringing the bells to us. On the 12th night of hearing them, the captain made us gather below deck. His face was pale, his voice brittle. He told us the story we'd suspected but never heard. Years ago, on another voyage, he'd lost half his men to the bells. They dived overboard, chasing the sound, convinced of treasure or salvation. None returned. Only once did he see what became of them. Days later, he spotted a figure bobbing in the tide. It was one of his men, chained at the wrists. A bell fused to his chest, eyes wide but empty. With every sway of the current, the bell tolled. He never forgot it. I wanted to believe the story was just another way to keep us afraid, but I couldn't ignore what I'd seen happen to Doyle. And worse, I couldn't ignore the way the bells changed when they called for me. They weren't just ringing anymore, they were speaking. Not words I could fully understand, but syllables forming in rhythm, pulling at me like a heartbeat. I felt them in my teeth, my spine, the back of my skull. Every part of me strained to look, to dive, to surrender. And each time I wondered how much longer I could resist. Last night, something new happened. The bells started, soft and distant, then louder, until the entire ship trembled. We covered our ears, shouted, prayed, but then through the chaos I heard it clear. My own name, woven into the tolling, stretched across the waves like a command. The others didn't hear it. Only me. My legs moved before my mind did, carrying me toward the railing, each step sinking with the chime. It wasn't until the captain slammed me against the mast, snarling into my face, that I broke free. You're dead, he spat, shaking me. But I saw the terror in his eyes, and I knew the truth. It wasn't just death waiting below, it was something worse. Now, as I write this, the bells have returned again. Louder, sharper, closer, and this time, I don't think they're beneath the waves anymore. They're inside the ship. I thought the bells were the end, that nothing could be worse than the chains and the drowned calling us into their choir. But I was wrong. The sea still had one last horror waiting, and the captain warned us in a voice more broken than I'd ever heard before. He gathered us in the mess hall, lantern light flickering across his face, shadows clinging to his jaw like they wanted to drag him away. He looked each of us in the eye, and with words heavy as the ocean itself, he gave the final command, Rule 11. When the thunder comes from below, do not stay on the ship. At first we didn't understand. Thunder was something we feared from the sky, not the water, but the captain explained in fragments, each word choked out like it hurt him. He told us of a sound that didn't belong to storms, a rolling fury that rose from the depths, shaking ships apart from their keels. Not natural thunder, not storms, something alive, vast enough to make the ocean itself its drum. His eyes were wet, as he admitted he'd only ever heard it once before. And that night, every man who stayed aboard was lost. It began subtly, the way terror often does. A low vibration, too faint to be sound, rattling the cups in the mess hall. The lantern flames quivered, their glass chiming softly. We froze, listening. Then came the first boom, deep, distant, like a giant heart beating beneath the waves. My chest shuddered with it. Another followed. Closer, louder, until the floor itself trembled. The sea wasn't calm anymore. It was awake. Panic erupted. Some men bolted for the deck. Others fell to their knees in prayer. I couldn't move. The sound pinned me, each pulse crawling up my bones, rattling my teeth, shaking my very skull. It wasn't just noise. It was a command, a warning, a summons all at once. The captain screamed for us to abandon ship, his voice hoarse, raw, desperate. Get to the boats. Now. His words cut through the chaos, but not enough to save us all. I stumbled up the stairs with 3 others, the thunder now booming so violently. The walls cracked and rivets popped free. On deck, the sea churned without wind, great spirals forming where the sound erupted. The air smelled of iron and ash, though no storm cloud stained the sky. Men scrambled to lower lifeboats, hands fumbling, ropes tangling, as the ship groaned like it was being crushed from below. A crack split the hull, spraying us with salt water that steamed against the lantern flames. I knew then this wasn't weather. It was something alive. I threw myself into the nearest boat, barely noticing who followed. 2 men jumped in after me, one crying, the other muttering incoherently. We hacked at the ropes, lowering ourselves shakily into the Black Sea. Above us, more men tried to do the same, but time betrayed them. The thunder roared again, so close it felt inside me, and the deck snapped in half. Lanterns tumbled, flames extinguished by the spray, screams swallowed instantly, as the dark surged upward like a mouth closing over prey. Our lifeboat hit the water hard, nearly capsizing. I clung to the sides as waves slapped us, violent but purposeful, like hands shoving us away from the dying ship. I forced myself to look back just once. Through the mist and chaos, I saw it, something vast, impossibly vast, rising just beneath the shattered hull. Not a creature I could name, not even fully visible, but a presence, a mountain of darkness beneath the surface, glowing faintly with lines of lightning that flashed inside the water itself. Every thunderous crack came from its movements, its rage, its hunger, and with each strike, the ship split further, until nothing remained but wreckage. The captain stood at the bow to the very end. I saw him silhouetted against the glow, refusing to leave even as the ocean devoured everything around him. His eyes never turned away, his posture rigid, as if defying the abyss with his final breath. Then the thunder rolled once more, louder than anything before, and he was gone, swallowed whole with the ship. Our little boat drifted for hours, tossed like driftwood by waves that seemed alive. The thunder faded, though its echo stayed lodged in my chest, vibrating long after the sound itself was gone. None of us spoke. We didn't dare. The sea had taught us silence, obedience, survival, and as dawn broke, painting the horizon pale gold, we realized we were still alive, for now. But survival didn't feel like victory. It felt like a reprieve. The rules had saved us, but at what cost? We'd left brothers, friends, even the captain behind, claimed by the abyss, and deep inside, I knew it wasn't finished. The sea doesn't forgive, the sea doesn't forget. One day the thunder will rise again from below, louder, closer, hungry for the ones who escaped. And when it does, I wonder if running will still be enough, because the sea has a way of reclaiming what belongs to it. And after everything I've seen, everything I've heard, I'm no longer sure we were ever meant to leave. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.